I wasn't looking for anyone. That's the part that still haunts me. It was early October in Chicago, the kind of autumn that paints every street corner gold and red, and for once, I was happy to be alone. I'd just gotten out of something messy, one of those long relationships that makes you question whether love is just a word we tell ourselves to feel less alone. I had my coffee, my books, my job as a freelance designer. I was okay. Not happy. Just okay. Then she walked in. Her name was Emily Carson. She had this quiet kind of presence, like a secret only the world hadn't figured out yet. She was wearing a forest green coat with little leaves tangled in her hair from the wind, and she laughed at something the barista said. Not a loud laugh, just enough to shift the air. I remember staring too long and then looking away like a coward. We didn't talk that day, but fate, or maybe just the universe being cheeky, kept putting her in my path. 1 week later, I saw her again at a bookstore in Wicker Park. She was crouched between two shelves, reading the back of a poetry book. I said something dumb like, "That's a good one," even though I hadn't read it. She smiled, lifted an eyebrow like she knew I was lying, and handed me the book. That's how it started. We were fire and stillness. I don't know how else to describe us. When we were together, the world slowed down. We'd walk the lakefront for hours without saying a word. Other nights, we'd talk until sunrise about everything and nothing. She was an artist, a painter. She once told me that color was the only language that made sense to her. I didn't understand it at first. But then she showed me a canvas she'd been working on, and I swear to God, it was like looking into her soul. She painted like she lived with feeling. Bold and wild and without apology. I fell in love with her mind first. Her quiet intelligence, the way she'd quote Maya Angelou or whisper facts about stars. Then I fell for her heart, the way she cried during dog commercials, or how she left sticky notes with "breathe" or "you're okay" in random places around my apartment when I was stressed. Our love wasn't perfect. We argued. About stupid things mostly, like whether pineapple belonged on pizza or if it was okay to leave the cap off the toothpaste. But the fights never lasted long. Her temper burned hot and quick, mine simmered slow. But somehow, we always found our way back. There was one night, I'll never forget it, when we drove out past the city limits just to chase a thunderstorm. She'd read somewhere that lightning struck the same place twice, and she wanted to prove it. We sat on the hood of my car, soaked from the rain, watching the sky tear itself open. She looked over at me and whispered, "If I disappear someday, promise you'll chase the storm too." I laughed. I thought she was being poetic. I didn't know she was warning me. The first time I noticed something was wrong, we were sitting on our usual park bench, the one near the pond where the ducks always gathered. Emily was quiet. Not the peaceful, dreamy kind of quiet she usually carried, but hollow. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee cup. When I asked if she was cold, she shook her head and said, "No, just a little off today." I let it go. But that off feeling kept showing up like an unwelcome guest. Sometimes she'd drift off mid-sentence, staring into space like she wasn't really there. Other times, she'd wake up in the middle of the night and just sit by the window. Watching. Breathing. Waiting for something I couldn't see. I asked her what was going on. She always smiled and said, "I'm okay. Just tired." But her eyes said otherwise. Weeks passed. Her paintings changed. They used to be vibrant, full of color and motion. Now they were pale, almost ghostly, dark silhouettes of women dissolving into fog, trees bending as if under invisible pressure. One of them had a single word scrawled at the bottom, "vanishing." One morning, I found her sitting on the floor of her studio, her back against the wall, paint on her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. No sobbing. Just leaking pain. I knelt beside her and held her, whispering her name again and again, like maybe if I said it enough times, I could anchor her to this world. That night, she told me. She had a neurological condition, rare, degenerative, and aggressive. Something with a name I can't even pronounce. It was like her brain was slowly unplugging itself, piece by piece. Memories would go first. Then speech. Then mobility. Then everything else. She said she'd known for months. I couldn't breathe. I remember the silence in the room after she told me. It wasn't just quiet, it was violent. Like the universe had sucked all the air out of the world and left us in a vacuum. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I stayed. I held her. I told her she was not going through this alone. She looked at me and said, "Don't let me become a burden." It shattered me. How do you watch someone you love fade like fog on glass? How do you hold on to someone who's slipping through your fingers, not because they want to leave, but because their body is giving up? We tried to live normally, but everything felt like a countdown. Every laugh, every kiss, every stupid inside joke, we clung to them like lifelines. I started documenting everything. Photos. Videos. Her voice. I didn't want to forget the way she said my name, or how she danced barefoot in the kitchen, or how she hummed when she painted. Then came the moment I'll never forget. We were out at the art museum, one of her favorite places. She stood in front of a Monet, staring at it like she was trying to memorize every brushstroke. And then she turned to me confused. She asked, "What's your name again?" Just like that. And I died inside. She apologized. Over and over. I told her it was okay, but my voice cracked, and she knew it wasn't. That night, I cried alone in the bathroom, biting my fist so she wouldn't hear. She was fading, day by day, and I couldn't stop it. But I also couldn't walk away. Then, one night, she was gone. I came home from the store and the door was unlocked. Her coat was missing. Her shoes by the door were gone. And on the kitchen table, she left a single canvas, a dark figure standing in a blizzard, reaching for a light in the distance. On the back, she wrote, "I love you, but I'm going where you can't follow." And just like that, she vanished. After Emily disappeared, time stopped pretending it made sense. Days blurred into each other like wet ink. Morning and night lost their meaning. I slept on the couch because the bed still smelled like her lavender soap and oil paint, and I couldn't survive waking up to that emptiness twice. The city outside kept moving, people laughing, cars honking, seasons changing, and I hated them all for it. The world didn't pause when she left. It didn't even notice. I stopped answering calls. My phone would light up friends, clients, my sister, and I'd just stare at it until the screen went dark again. Talking meant explaining, and explaining meant accepting that Emily was gone. I wasn't ready to make that real. I barely recognized myself. I'd catch my reflection in windows as I walked past, unshaven, hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped forward like I was apologizing to the ground for existing. I moved through the city like a ghost, present but unseen. A shadow. But even shadows belong to something. Every night, I replayed her last words in my head. "I'm going where you can't follow." I refused to believe that. Emily wasn't someone who ran. She was brave. She faced storms head-on. If she left, it was because she thought she was protecting me or because someone convinced her she had no other choice. That thought lit something ugly and sharp inside my chest. I started searching. At first, it was subtle. I rewatched every video I'd taken of her, listening for clues. I went through her studio inch by inch, opening drawers, flipping canvases, reading the backs. She'd always written notes there, thoughts, fragments, dates. Patterns emerged. Doctor appointments she never told me about. A research facility name scribbled more than once. Northlake Neurological Institute. So I went there. They told me they couldn't share patient information. HIPAA laws. Polite smiles. Closed doors. But when I asked about experimental trials for degenerative conditions, the receptionist hesitated, just for a second. Long enough. I didn't stop there. I spoke to former patients in online forums. I read medical journals until my eyes burned. I learned about experimental treatments, unapproved trials, private funding. The more I uncovered, the darker it got. People disappearing from public records. Families signing non-disclosure agreements. Success stories that vanished as quickly as they appeared. And in the middle of it all, Emily. She hadn't run away. She'd been taken by hope. By a promise. A chance to slow the disease, maybe even stop it. But at what cost? I wasn't the same man anymore. The version of me who laughed easily, who designed logos and worried about deadlines, that man was gone. In his place stood someone fueled by obsession and love and rage. Someone who didn't sleep much. Someone who didn't care about consequences. I followed paper trails. I showed up where I wasn't invited. I asked questions people didn't want to answer. And when doors stayed closed, I learned how to push harder. There were moments, late at night, when doubt crept in. When I wondered if I was chasing a ghost. If she really was gone. If holding on was just another way of hurting myself. But then I'd remember her hands in mine. Her voice. Her fear when she said, "Don't let me become a burden." I wouldn't let her disappear alone. I might have become a shadow, but shadows exist because there is still light somewhere. And I was going to find it. You can only knock on the devil's door so many times before it opens. I found the name Dr. Adrian Kessler scribbled in the margins of one of Emily's sketchbooks, right next to a faded sticky note with a Northlake address. The handwriting was uneven and shaky. It must have been from her final days before she left. I looked him up. Private researcher. Specializing in neurological conditions. No published studies in over 3 years. Ties to a biotech company in Boston that had been investigated and quietly cleared for unethical patient trials. Everything about him smelled like secrets. So I drove there. The Northlake Institute sat on the edge of a wooded property outside the city. It looked more like a retreat center than a medical facility, quiet, sterile, secluded. I parked across the street, heart pounding so hard it shook the steering wheel. I walked in like I belonged. Clipboard in hand. Clean shirt. Steady voice. Delivery for Dr. Kessler's research wing. The security guard waved me through. Inside, it was colder than I expected. White walls, soft beeps from machines, fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. I wandered the halls searching. Room numbers. Locked doors. A nurse passed me and nodded, unfazed. Then I saw her. Behind a glass window. Sitting in a room with soft lighting. A therapist's voice humming in the background. Her hair was shorter. She looked thinner. But it was her. Emily. I stopped breathing. She didn't see me. She was staring blankly at the therapist. Nodding slightly. Her fingers tapped a rhythm on her leg, something she used to do when she was nervous. I wanted to break the glass, scream her name, pull her out and never let go. But I froze. My hands were shaking. Before I could move, someone grabbed my arm. "Sir, you're not supposed to be here." 2 security guards. Suits, serious faces. I tried to speak. My mouth didn't work. "Sir," I snapped. I shoved past them, yelling her name. Emily. She turned toward the glass, confused at first. Then recognition. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled. She stood up, stumbling toward the window, hands pressed against it. "Jack," she whispered. The guards pulled me away. I fought. Screamed. My voice cracked in places I didn't know it could. One of them punched me. Hard. Blood in my mouth. Still, I fought. They threw me out onto the front steps. Told me the police would be called. That I was trespassing on private medical property. That Emily Carson had voluntarily entered a high-risk memory treatment program and signed a confidentiality waiver. Voluntarily? No chance in hell. Over the next 3 days, I contacted every lawyer I knew. Only one was willing to take on the case, pro bono. A woman named Claire Novak, known for biting into corporations and not letting go. She didn't flinch when I told her everything. She just said, "We'll make noise." We filed an injunction. Demanded a mental competency review. Released her art publicly as evidence of declining consent capacity. I gave statements. Claire called in reporters. The story caught fire. Chicago woman trapped in controversial medical facility. Suddenly, Dr. Kessler wasn't so untouchable. Under pressure, the institute allowed an independent neurologist to examine Emily. The results were devastating, but clear. Her condition was real. But she had not been capable of giving full informed consent to the level of experimentation they'd subjected her to. The court ruled in our favor. When I returned to the institute, this time with legal papers in hand, they didn't stop me. Emily was sitting in the same room. She looked at me, eyes glassy, but this time there was a flicker of something. Memory. Home. I knelt in front of her. "I found you," I whispered. I never stopped looking. She blinked slowly. Then she smiled. Not big. Not wild. Just enough to tell me she knew who I was. I knew you would, she said, voice barely a whisper. I held her hands. They were colder than I remembered. But they were still hers. They released her into my care 2 weeks later. That sentence sounds simple. Clean. Like the end of a battle. It wasn't. Emily didn't come back the same. She remembered my name most days. Some days she remembered our apartment. Fewer days, our story. She moved slower now, like every step required negotiation with her own body. Words sometimes escaped her mid-sentence, leaving her staring at me with frustration and fear, like she'd been abandoned by her own mind. And I learned quickly that love isn't just holding someone when things are easy. Love is patience when you're exhausted. Love is answering the same question 10 times without letting your voice crack. Love is swallowing grief so the person you adore doesn't have to carry it too. I quit my job. I sold my car. I turned our apartment into a small world designed entirely around her needs, labels on drawers, reminders on walls, alarms for medication, soft lighting to prevent confusion. I learned how to cook meals that supported her brain health. I learned how to recognize the signs of a bad day before she did. Friends said I was strong. They didn't see the nights I locked myself in the bathroom and shook silently so she wouldn't hear. They didn't see the way I mourned the version of Emily who used to tease me, challenge me, argue with me. They didn't see how I mourned myself. Because somewhere along the way I changed. I used to believe in fairness. In balance. In rules. Now I believed in outcomes. I used to avoid conflict. Now I confronted doctors. Administrators. Anyone who treated her like a case instead of a person. I became sharper. Harder. More controlled. Love burned away my softness and replaced it with resolve. One afternoon, Emily was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling over her face. She looked peaceful. Then she asked, very calmly, "Are you still happy with me?" The question hit harder than any punch. I knelt beside her chair and took her hands. They were thinner now. Fragile. But still warm. "There's no version of my life," I said slowly, carefully, "where I walk away from you and call it happiness." She studied my face like she was trying to memorize it. Then she nodded, satisfied, and leaned her head against my shoulder. That was the moment I understood the cost. This love would take things from me, dreams, freedom, pieces of my identity. It already had. But it would also give me something brutal and beautiful, purpose. I wasn't the man I was when I met her in that coffee shop. I was someone else now. Someone forged by loss. Someone shaped by devotion. Someone who chose love even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Emily died on a Wednesday morning. The sky was overcast, soft gray light filling our apartment. Quiet. Still. She passed in her sleep peacefully, they say, though the word feels too clean. There was nothing peaceful about the way the silence settled in after. Nothing peaceful about folding the blanket she always used, or brushing a strand of her hair from her face one last time, knowing it wouldn't move again. Her hand was in mine when she went. That matters to me. It matters more than I can explain. I sat with her for a long time after. I whispered stories into her ear even though I knew she couldn't hear me. I told her about the time we saw the storm roll in over the lake, how she laughed when we got drenched. I told her she kept every promise she ever made, even when her body broke them for her. I told her I loved her, and that I always would. After they took her away, I stayed in the apartment for days. People brought food, left flowers, wrote cards. I appreciated it, I think, but I couldn't feel any of it. Grief isn't loud. It's not sobs or screams. Not really. Grief is quiet. It's standing in the hallway and realizing the bathroom door is open and she's not inside. It's hearing a song on the radio and having to pull over because your hands are shaking too hard to steer. I kept the apartment exactly the same. For weeks. Her sketchbook still on the coffee table. Her shoes by the door. I couldn't touch any of it. Not yet. But eventually, slowly, I started to live again. I walked the lakefront. I reopened my laptop. I started writing down everything, every memory, every color of her voice, every unfinished painting she left behind. I called it the museum of her. It wasn't for anyone else. Just for me. Just to remember. And here's what I've learned. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes shape. It becomes the ache in your chest when you hear their name. It becomes the breath you take when you see their favorite color. It becomes the way your hands still move through the world with tenderness because they once held someone worth everything. Love and pain, they are one. You cannot truly have one without risking the other. And that's not tragic. That's beautiful. Emily taught me that. She once told me that colors were the only language that ever made sense to her. In the end, I think love is the same way. It's not logical. It doesn't follow rules. It's messy, brilliant, wordless, and real. If I could go back, knowing how it would all end, knowing the agony of watching her fade, I would still love her. Again and again. Because for a little while, I got to call someone like her mine. And that, I think, is more than most people ever get.